This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. And so the manipulation and deceit continues on. This week, Hello Magazine in the UK, not in the US, in the UK, covering all of Harry's events as well as the rundown from last week, in addition to this alleged meeting. And we'll get to that in a second. But I want to point out here that it's been a while since Harry or Meghan have been on the cover of the UK version of Hello. It does appear that this is part of the palace PR and spin, because before we get to this full spread with Prince Harry, they cover the King's events, they cover Catherine's events, they cover her climbing to the top of those mountains. They also cover Princess Anne. I mean, literally almost every page leading up to this exclusive, which I'm going to go ahead and read and point a couple important things out. Harry's turbulent homecoming, palace politics, ongoing family feuds, and a crushing legal blow make for a tricky week as the Duke of Sussex returns to the UK. The article begins, "The stage was set for the first reunion between the king and his youngest grandchildren in more than 4 years as Prince Archie Markle, 7, and Princess Little Betty Markle, 5, joined their parents, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, in the UK. Despite a week of high drama that is said to have tested the monarch's patience to the very limit, the Sussex family were reunited with the king and queen at Highgrove. Hello understands that the family were hosted on Friday afternoon, although at time of going to press, there was no official statement from either party." So this part is really important because it's confirming that nobody has any concrete evidence that this meeting actually took place. It says here, although at the time of going to press, there was no official statement from either party. And yet, these so-called broadcasters and journalists want everybody to believe these so-called sources that they have at the palace. For all we know, these so-called sources could be like the assistant to the assistant to the assistant of the person who shines King Charles's shoes. You know what I mean? For our purposes here, it's likely the PR company that's behind in rehabilitating Prince Harry's so-called damaged and tarnished image to bring him back in. And part of that is crafting this story in order to thaw the ice or thaw the public's perception of what's really going on here. But this meeting never happened, especially since there has been no evidence showing that Meghan was ever in the UK or any kind of sign that Harry was with these so-called phantom children. Like, you're going to go spend your time with other people's children, as we've seen Harry and Meghan do in the past, but not bring your own kids, especially when one of them is old enough to be able to somewhat comprehend what is going on, to maybe show them the work that you're doing. This seriously makes you look like a shit parent. You know, as Harry likes to call these people family, I would think that they would respect not taking photos of the children, especially knowing how sensitive Harry is about putting them up on social media. But this guy has no problem exploiting other people's children. Like, I find the whole farce getting beyond ridiculous now. You know, at this point, we shouldn't just accept this slop that we're continuously being fed. You know, at this point in the game, 10 years later, after being lied to and manipulated by the media, that it's not unreasonable to demand evidence that this meeting actually did happen. The information coming from a palace source is not good enough anymore. And just like People magazine here in the United States for the Harkles, Hello Magazine in the UK is a mouthpiece for the royal family. This is propaganda that's being pushed out in alignment with whatever strategy is in place for the royal family. In this case, it's removing the so-called accountability if indeed down the road it is discovered that this meeting never happened. Well, they can come back and say, well, there was no official palace statement that came out. And there you have this plausible deniability again. But anyway, continuing on with this, at the heart of this is a father and grandfather who wanted to see his second son and his grandchildren. A source tells Hello. But with palace politics surrounding the decision not to accommodate the Duke at a royal residence, a devastating ruling in his latest High Court legal action, and embarrassing claims about illicit briefings to the media, Prince Harry's homecoming got off to the rockiest of starts. And after courtiers refused to accommodate Harry at Buckingham Palace on the night he publicly attacked His Majesty's judiciary, narrowly avoiding a situation in which the king's constitutional position could have been jeopardized, there had been doubts that the reunion would take place at all. However, the royal author Robert Jobson believes that the king's desire to get to know Archie Markle and little Betty Markle prevailed. The king is a grandfather who wants a relationship with his grandchildren, he says. Go ahead and hit that like button if you think this is utter bullshit. Continues on. Although Harry has seen his father a few times in the past couple of years, most recently last September, Charles had not seen his youngest grandchildren since 2022 when they visited the UK during Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Archie Markle was 3 years old, and little Betty Markle marked her first birthday at Windsor. Oh yeah, the Platinum Jubilee. Another example of this kind of fuckery with these kids. We were told a whole bunch of stories about this so-called meeting between little Betty and Archie, and then a photo allegedly was taken, but the palace is holding on to it. Same situation going on here. In Prince Harry's book Spare, filled with nothing but fantasy, he writes about Queen Elizabeth immediately complimenting the kids on their manners, saying, "Sweetest children," Granny said, sounding bemused, Prince Harry added. He goes on to say, "She'd expect them to be a bit more American, I think," he said, meaning, in her mind, more rambunctious. Well, you know Meghan, manners, manners, manners. Well, anyway, there's no evidence that this meeting took place either. I held on to this little gem from 3 years ago by Markle News 1, where they write, whether the person on the phone who was saying this wanted it to be overheard is anyone's guess, but these two sentences are troubling. They, Harry and his wife, are going to great lengths to ensure we know nothing about those children, and furthermore, they are spreading misinformation about them. The Queen never once saw Archie or little Betty. This is what I was told by someone on Quora who works for the royal household. I have messaged them many times about conversations that are overheard within the palace walls. If this is factual, and I have no reason to believe it isn't true, I think we can expect something to happen before too long. So continuing on with this bullshit. The fact that the king met up with his younger son and his family naturally sparked talk of reconciliation. Despite the complexities of their situation, there has always been a willingness to meet on both sides, according to a longtime friend of the Duke who tells Hello, Harry has a relationship with his father and both sides are keen for the families to see each other. It was about making it happen at the right place and at the right time. So we're now going from Prince Harry having no contact with his family and King Charles had stopped taking Prince Harry's calls to Harry communicating with the palace through lawyers to now communicating regularly now with his father. Are you still buying the slop that we were fed? It gets better. A week of high drama leading up to the highly anticipated reunion raised questions about how much bridge building they could achieve. The Duke had planned to return to the UK with the Duchess at his side to shine a light on the Invictus Games, which remained perhaps his greatest achievement. But days before they were due to arrive, he announced that Meghan and the children would no longer travel with him to London, citing security concerns while suggesting that they might join him later in the week. The family were also thought to be planning to spend time at Althorpe, the ancestral home of his mother, the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and the location of her final resting place. The estate had been closed to the public on 10th, and the 11th of July, raising the prospect that the Sussexes would base themselves there. But at the beginning of the week, before Harry even touched down on home soil, his spokesman confirmed that he had formally accepted the king's offer of accommodation at Buckingham Palace. Within 15 minutes, the story changed. Harry had, in fact, declined the offer after weeks of deliberation, only to change his mind a few hours later. But it was too late. Palace officials told him that the deadline to accept had passed and that the offer was no longer on the table. The official reason given was that staff needed a minimum of 48 hours' notice to prepare hospitality amid ongoing building work. But there was also another complicating factor: the looming verdict in Harry's case against Associated Newspapers on July 7th, the date on which the Duke had requested to stay. See, I call bullshit on this because when Harry gives his plans 28 days in advance, he has to tell them where he's staying so they can scope out and do all the necessary things to prepare for his security. So I'm not buying this story one bit. From both sides, Harry was looking to go stay for a day. There's like 700 rooms in Buckingham Palace. You mean to tell me they needed 48 hours to prepare for this fool to show up? Come on. After Harry's camp brief that he would deliver a statement from an undisclosed location, once the ruling was handed down, courtiers feared that the palace might become the backdrop for a war of words that might call the king's constitutional position into question. As one source put it, alarm bells started going off like a klaxon. I don't know if I believe this story. I mean, it is plausible, but I find it really absurd to think that this situation would call the king's constitutional position into question when there's so many other things that are calling his position into question. You know what I mean? And part of me feels as if Harry was already staying on palace grounds, but this story is to create this facade and distance for the optics. We know that Harry can move around without being detected. We know that. So is it possible that he's been staying on one of those royal properties? It's possible, but we would never know because they only share what they want us to know or want to force us to believe, like this stupid story of Charles meeting with these two invisible kids. As I predicted, there's now going to be a whole bunch of stories of what allegedly happened during this meeting, right? And with all of these stories being cranked out, there's still no official palace source confirming it or any kind of evidence that this took place. Make that make sense. For all the recent talk of Harry's frequent conversations with his father, it seemed that their communication regarding the visit had been less than seamless. Again, we went from having very little contact with the royal family to now Harry having frequent conversations directly with the king. When did that all of a sudden started? Now, I want you to take a moment and think about your favorite commentators and journalists who have come forward with the inside scoop from their excellent sources. And ask yourself, does any of it jive with what's now being reported in Hello Magazine? As I said earlier in this video, Hello Magazine in the UK is a propaganda outlet and mouthpiece for the royal family. But I digress. The article continues. Harry learned that all of his claims of unlawful information gathering had been dismissed by Mr. Justice Nicklin moments before his first public engagement of the trip, as had the claims made by other celebrities, including Sir Elton John, Elizabeth Hurley, and Sadie Frost. Associated described the ruling as an overwhelming victory and a magnificent vindication of its journalism. At Chatham House, where I watched him take part in the conference organized by the Invictus Games Foundation, Harry looked red-faced, and despite joking that everyone had turned up for the air conditioning, did not appear at ease. Over the years, I've watched him speak passionately about the Invictus Games with a conviction and enthusiasm that was always inspiring. That afternoon, the spark was missing. His voice sounded reedy as he delivered a 6-minute speech. And the person that's reporting here is Emily Nash. She is part of the Royal Rota. After the panel discussions, he spent an hour locked in talks with his lawyer, David Sherborne, before walking out with a smile and a thumbs up for the camera. But Harry could not contain his fury, later decrying the ruling as a complete and obvious whitewash, adding, "The lengths to which the court has gone to exonerate the male are shocking, as they are totally unwarranted." When the court says that there is not sufficient evidence of wrongdoing, despite the documents showing otherwise, one does wonder how justice was ever going to be achieved. Speaking of a scenario in which the prince could have spoken out while being hosted at Buckingham Palace, Robert Jobson says, if Harry had delivered that statement attacking the law courts while staying in the palace, where £369 million have been spent on modernizing the headquarters of the monarchy, it would have looked totally wrong. You see, this is what I keep telling everybody. Everything that you see with the royal family is carefully curated. It's all about the optics. Robert Jobson continues on by saying, consider the pillars of our national life in his father's kingdom: a free press, an independent judiciary, an elected government, and a monarchy that stands above the fray. Do they really stand above the fray? Come on now. Who are you kidding? They're so involved in all of this. They just have other people doing it for them, so they can keep their hands clean. That's what it boils down to. Harry has taken aim at 3 of them. He sued the king's government over his security. He accused a national newspaper of criminality and lost overwhelmingly. Now he has cast doubt on the court itself. Robert, the author of Our King, Charles III, The Man and the Monarch Revealed, adds, for a man in the king's position, of his age, and with his health, he doesn't need added stress. He wanted to meet his grandchildren, but it doesn't take away the fact that his son has questioned the judgment of a high court judge, and that puts him in an invidious position. It's a sentiment with which fellow royal author Robert Hardman agrees. Harry's obsessive fight through the courts has made it difficult for the king, as head of the judiciary, to have any sort of meaningful contact with his son, given Harry's well-known propensity to regurgitate everything in public. He says, of course he wants to see his grandchildren, but while they may have met for the children's sake, there is no prospect of meaningful reconciliation. You can't have the king's son criticizing a judge and the judicial process, and then a few days later have happy family chit-chats. Harry's legal battle is far from over, with decisions to be made about who will foot the bill for the reported £50 million in legal fees. So here's my take on this. On one hand, you have Hello Magazine saying that Harry and his father are in frequent contact. But then on the other hand, you have Robert Hardman saying, well, it really is going to be hard for any meaningful reconciliation. Well, how can you have regular contact with someone if you haven't reconciled? You see what I'm saying? Now, this next part's funny. And although it wasn't the outcome he was hoping for, those close to him say that it won't change his stance. This has been a long road for him, but he's always believed in accountability and wanted to put his head above the parapet on behalf of others who felt a sense of injustice, says a source close to Harry. Meghan. But there's also been a lot of positivity and a lot of focus on what he was here to do, so it wasn't the only thing preoccupying him at all. Another source close to the Duke, Meghan, said that he had to put the case out of his head to focus on the Invictus Games events and other engagements with his patronages, including WellChild, a national charity for seriously ill children. There will be lots of time to worry about all of that, but this was not the week, they said. Hopefully you're noticing in these articles that more and more they're making it sound like Harry is back to doing his old job, going out and supporting his engagements and doing what he knows best, which is his life of duty and service. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the marketing and language in these propaganda pieces are very similar to a working royal. So in this case, talking about Harry going to the UK to support his patronages, there's no mention of Archewell Fugazi Public Charity or Harry's work at Better Up as Chimpo. None of that. We're going back to Harry supporting the causes that he loves and doing his royal thing. If Harry really left the firm, there would be no need for him to be coordinating with the palace. What is he coordinating with the palace for? When you leave a company, you're not coordinating or calling up your old company to let them know what you're up to, right? I hope everybody's starting to finally see how we were all played for fools. And they're still playing us for fools because this event with these invisible children did not happen. As a sane person, there's no evidence that supports it. I look at it this way. These so-called palace sources that said that this meeting took place could have very well have said that puppies fell out of the sky. Would you have believed it had a palace source said that puppies fell out of the sky? No! You would want to see evidence of that. So why are people not demanding the same thing of these two invisible children, especially when there's a history of fuckery? Anyway, allow me to finish this article. It says here the drama continues. Harry's challenging week continued, however, media access to his visit to the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, the day after the court ruling, a trip on which Meghan had been due to join him, had already been cancelled. But even in the absence of a public appearance, the drama rolled on. This time, the journalist Charlotte Griffiths, whom Harry had accused of wrongdoing, revealed her connections to his friends and his team, saying that they had leaked information to her, even while he was preparing to sue her employers. As Harry grappled with the fallout, it was business as usual for the rest of the royal family. William visited the London Welsh School in Hanwell to meet pupils, as well as athletes set to compete at this summer's Commonwealth Games, before spending a day in Hastings almost 1,000 years after his namesake defeated a certain Harold in battle. The king, in turn, was riding a tank in Bovington, Dorset, meeting British transport police officers in London and, along with the Queen, visiting London Zoo to spend time with its penguins and tortoises. Harry reappeared for the cameras at Birmingham Children's Hospital on Thursday, celebrating 20 years of Well Child Specialist Nursing Program, which helps to move seriously ill children from hospital to their homes. He was mobbed by nurses and spent time with young patients, revealing to one that his son Archie was obsessed with Lego and a master builder. A day later, Harry played pickleball and wheelchair rugby with Invictus competitors at the NEC in Birmingham, marking the start of a one-year countdown to the 2027 Invictus Games. Meghan stayed out of the public eye. She had been due to attend to help promote the event, but hours earlier, her team had confirmed that she would make no public appearances in the UK. Well, could it be that Meghan didn't go to the UK? That's possible. When asked if the Duchess and their children were proud of him, Harry said, "They don't tell me every day that they're proud of me, but I'm proud of them. They're proud of me. I love my family." Speaking to Alison Hammond, co-host of the Great British Bake Off, he said, "My kids love Junior Bake Off. Absolutely love it. I love it as well." More than 100 miles away in Windsor, Prince William was joined by his wife, the Princess, as he saddled up for the DMMI Royal Charity Polo Cup at Guards Polo Club, an annual event in which he and Harry used to play together and which has raised more than £15 million for charity over the years. Kate presented the trophy to William on the podium, kissing him on both cheeks after his U.S. Polo Association team claimed victory at the club in Windsor, which is a stone's throw from their home Forest Lodge. She applauded and smiled, and he made his way over to her to accept his prize. She presented prizes to all the players, as well as the umpires, having watched the event with members of the couple's staff, including the Prince's Equerry squadron leader, Mike Reynolds. There was no plan for the royal brothers to meet, however. They've had no contact for several years, and the door is said to be firmly closed, as far as William is concerned, following Harry's public comments about him and his family. Whatever the outcome of his private weekend with Meghan, Archie, and little Betty in the UK, Harry will be back on these shores after summer for the annual Well Child Awards and the inaugural Invictus Spirit Awards, both in September. Oh, great! I'm sure the UK is excited. In the meantime, he will have plenty of opportunities to consider his next move, but whether the reunion between his family and his father proves to be the tentative first step towards rebuilding trust remains to be seen. For all the palace politics, legal drama, and family tensions, at the heart of this visit was a chance for a grandfather to spend precious time with the grandchildren he had not seen for 4 years. As Harry himself said last year, there's no point in fighting anymore. You know what's interesting about this cover story is that it was supposed to be about Harry, but they chose to integrate Prince William into it. This is one of the few times that I've seen them now bring the brothers back together. And even though they are making it clear, or at least that's what they're telling us today, that Harry and William have not spoken to each other, somehow I'm starting to not believe that. Now, I'm not saying that Harry and William are talking behind the scenes frequently like how Harry is talking with his father, but somehow I find it difficult to believe that Harry has had zero contact with William. I do. I really find that hard to believe. When you look at the amount of lies that have been told about this saga between Harry and Meghan, these phantom children, the relationship with the royal family, how can you trust that what we are being told about William now is even true? I think it's reasonable to have doubts. I think it's reasonable to question it, especially with the mountains of evidence that's out there. Anyone that is shaming others for having a difference in opinion or not going along with the preferred narrative, then maybe we should look a little closer at those people. Just a thought. But that's all I have for you today. What do you guys think? Go ahead and leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.